Hello, welcome to Philosophy All Along. Here on this show, our goal is to apply deep thought to stuff that interests us. Hopefully, we'll get to spend a lot of time talking about movies and TV shows, books, and comics, and having a conversation about them. We're also going to talk about important things that are happening in the world. Again, things that are important to us. Let's go ahead and get right down to it. One of the things that I find most concerning right now in the discussion of what happened in this election, right? How did the Democrats lose? How did Harris lose? This is that you have a lot of the pundits out there, many of whom I think are really thoughtful, very informed. They know a lot more about this stuff than I do. They're informed people, but I think that they are avoiding certain aspects of the conversation, possibly out of fear, fear of alienating their audience, and fear of ending up under the gaze of someone like Donald Trump, right, who is really focused on censoring and quieting the media. So what is it that they're saying? Well, right now, kind of the scream that's going out across the pundits who do this analysis, right? So people like Chris Cizella and David Brooks, who are both, again, really thoughtful analysts, this was the economy. At the end of the day, there's a fair number of reasons why, Harris lost, but the number one reason, the thing that really motivated, like if you look at the numbers and what people are saying, it was the economy. When you look at the number of people who said why they voted as they did or what their concerns were amongst the voters, something like 60% said they didn't like the direction the country was going economically. And of those people, a significant percentage, if not a majority of that, a majority clearly of those people voted for Donald Trump. The thing that I find a little disingenuous about it is before that, right, we were spending so much time talking about, well, here's a base, right? Here's the Democratic base. They're going to vote for Harris. Here's the MAGA base. They're going to vote for Trump. And then you have the Republican base. A lot of them are going to vote for Trump. And then you have independents, right? And swing voters. So most of the conversation was revolving around bases. And what were people like Cizilla and Brooks saying before the election? Well, those bases are basically unmovable. And what's weird to me is now they're saying, well, again, it was the economy. The whole country moved with Trump because they were unhappy about the economy. And that seems to be directly in contradiction to the math and the basic facts that they were describing before, most notably that there are bases that, for the most part, do not move.
Okay, let's take a quick look at the numbers. The most recent research that I've been able to find, according to Pew, suggests about the following numbers, which, give and take a little bit, but it does seem to be everything else that I found seems to suggest this is relatively accurate. Okay, so amongst people who are registered voters, about 33% of them identify themselves as basically base Republicans. They lean Republican, they view themselves as conservative ideology, MAGA base, so on and so forth. Over the years, more recently, the Democratic base has gotten smaller, where people who identify themselves specifically as Democrats is only about 23%. The largest group is actually independents. People are like, well, I don't know, I could go kind of either way in terms of this, and I'm not sure, so I'm an independent. So they're about 44% of registered voters. So all we have to do is kind of look at the basic math here, right? To get to about 52 to 48%, right? So in the final tally, let's say that Donald Trump gets 52% of the popular vote and Harris gets 48% of the popular vote. Well, for that math to work, given what the bases are, that would mean that about 19% of those independents broke for Trump to get him to 52%. 25% of those independents broke for Harris. Now notice that would mean that although a significant percentage of the population was voting based on economy and a significant portion of those people are voting for Trump, that 25% of the population that probably does have economic concerns still voted for Harris anyways. The most important number comparison here, though, and again, like, you know, you can round this one way or the other. That's, fine. These aren't perfect numbers. But all you have to do is look at the fact that the MAGA base number, no matter how you view it, is significantly larger than the percentage of independents who voted for Trump. So what that means in my reading is that about 20% of the people who voted for Trump based on an economic concern, right? They would have voted for Harris. They don't really have a concern about that. The only real concern that they have is like, I feel like I'm not making enough money and I'm unhappy with the economy where it is, or things are too expensive. And I think Trump can fix that. Maybe there's also a bit of like, I'm not sure a woman could do it, but let's be honest. Voters tend to trust Republicans more on the economy anyways. So it's no surprise that you have a large percentage of that population, of those independent voters, moving that way. So let's just say that that's totally innocuous. They're going based on economy. But that still leaves the vast majority of his voters voting regardless of economy. And why do I say that? What I mean is that significant percentage of voters voted for Trump in 2020 as well. And in 2020, the economy was tanking, right? And you might say, well, that wasn't Trump's fault. That was COVID. But regardless, if voters are punishing presidents for where they are in terms of their pocketbooks and economy and so on and so forth, if they're punishing the party and they're punishing the president for that, then what you really end up seeing is oh, well, MAGA and the Republican base does not punish the president if the president is Trump, regardless. So they were voting for something else, right? They were voting on some other issue. And when you interview them, they might say, well, I'm voting because of economy, so on and so forth, but clearly not, right? If those same people are voting for Trump when the economy's bad. So what are those 33% of people voting on?
So that means that in reality, and I want to speak in this moment directly to the pundits themselves. In reality, at best, it's really only actually 20% of the population voting on economy, actually, honestly doing that. And they'll say, well, wait a minute, Nick. When we take polls and we ask people what are they voting about, well, you're getting something like 60% of the population saying, well, I'm unhappy with the direction the country is headed, specifically in regards to the economy. So are you telling me then that the MAGA base, had they felt like the economy was going well, we're all of a sudden, you know what, I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump. How do I know that's empirically false? Empirically, not just emotionally false, right? Like observationally false. Because the MAGA base voted for him when the economy was tanking in 2020. So then, if we want to ask ourselves, why did Trump win? We should not, as a nation, go, oh, well, because the country overwhelmingly was unhappy with Biden's economic policy, and that's why they voted as they did. Baloney. The MAGA base would have voted for Donald Trump regardless of where the economy was. Period, full stop. How do we know? Because when the economy was tanking under Trump, the MAGA base still voted for him. And you might be like, well, wait a minute, Trump lost that election. Yes, because those swing voters, those people in the middle who vote based on what they consider is the welfare of their families, well, they went for Biden. But the MAGA base, right, a massive percentage of this country still voted for Trump, regardless of the fact that under Trump, the economy was utterly collapsing, right? The stock market was falling, COVID was a mess, the whole thing was nightmarish. And yet the MAGA base, a massive, I think more people voted for Trump the second time than they did the first time, right? So that base is going to vote for him no matter what, no matter where the economy is. So stop telling me that the majority of people voted for Donald Trump because of the economy. No, the majority of people who voted for Donald Trump for some reason, regardless of the economy. And what's that reason? And my best theory, honestly, is hatred. And I don't want to sound like, oh, someone who thinks just like everyone who votes for Donald Trump like is full of hate and malice and racism and rage and so on and so forth. No, what I'm saying is the MAGA base, which is the majority of that people who did vote for Donald Trump, but not all of them by any stretch, that majority of that voting base are people who, when you look at his rallies, when you look at the things that they're saying online, are filled with utter loathing for liberals, Democrats, and anything that they consider to be a liberal or Democrat policy. Doesn't matter what it is. Whatever Trump points his finger at, these people say, I hate it. That's awful. Doesn't matter. Look at how many things have been turned on their head in terms of policy and what they, it used to be everyone needed Russia on the right, and now Republicans are fine with it, right? But he points his finger over at Ukraine, and all of a sudden, you've got the MAGA-based anti-Ukraine. You see all these things coming out on social media about how Zelensky's actually a bad person. So wherever he points his finger and says, hate those people, they will do that. And it comes out in the nastiest, most vitriolic ways. We have people now on Twitter bragging to women who are posting about concerns about their body and their safety, bragging to them, well, now we get to rape you. Really awful stuff is out there. Before the election, people were saying the nastiest things. And yes, some of that also happens on the left, but it's very rarely about, oh, we're coming to get you, we're going to rape all of you, right? It'll be like, well, that orange man or something like that, or you're awful people. It's very rarely things like, one of a famous conservative is the guy who shot Osama bin Laden, right? And he recently posted a picture of some young men who came out for Harris, right? And they had, they're famous influencers, and they had said, young white guys for Harris, right? Well, he responded to them saying, you're not men, you're boys. And if it wasn't for social media, you'd be my concubines. Well, if we look at that, we look at the language of that is a language of dominance, hatred, rape, so on and so forth. You might be like, well, Nick, wait a minute. I think if we looked across socials and all of that, you'd see it on both sides. And you'd be like, and you might say, well, wait a minute, Nick, come on. Is that fair? Look at how nasty liberals can get. Well, let me just try and briefly give you one other piece of evidence, as opposed to kind of like anecdotally going down or arguing with you about your own experience. Just ask ourselves, if it was about the economy, as opposed to rage and hate and malice, what was Donald Trump empirically? What was his appeal in terms of what he was saying? Like what was his vocal appeal near the end of the election? And you can compare that to Harris, who definitely was like, okay, he's a fascist, our democracy is in danger, right? Her language, though, was far more, we need to work together. I want a Republican in my cabinet. Let's turn the page on this, etc. Her language was never Donald Trump is stupid or nasty or, low IQ or any of that, right? That language was purposely avoided by Harris. If it was about economy that truly motivated people, the majority of people who voted for Donald Trump, then we could reasonably say that his ending appeal, right, the last things that he was saying was, hey, listen, do you think you're better off economically? Do you think you're better off economically now than you were before the Biden-Harris administration? No? Then you should vote. But, he would touch on that. But what was the majority of his rally voice? What was he saying? Who was he bringing on? And all the pundits were like, holy cannoli, this guy is closing horribly. He's tanking himself. He's in a winning position and he's going to lose the election. They argued because his language was so violent, and they were like, who is he speaking to? He's speaking to his base, right? So they're bringing out people who are making fun of Puerto Rico and calling them trash and talking about how they can't stop getting themselves pregnant, right? The language of calling her, the devil, all of these things were things that he was promoting, right? And not ever taking a space to say, I personally happen to disagree with that. Like even when they would distance themselves from the Puerto Rico comment, there wasn't Donald Trump coming out and saying, you know what, that was wrong. I don't believe in that. You are part of our country. You are as important a part of our country, right? And so all I mean to say is that his language, if the pundits were right, if he was speaking to his base, and what was he saying when he spoke to his base was this language of violence, this language of fear, this language to a degree of like kind of cleansing, right? An ethnic cleansing of Democrats, for lack of a better phrasing, right? They're the enemies within. We're going to get rid of them. We're going to clean it out. Well, then that means that Donald Trump was speaking to his base, and what his base wanted to hear was hate. Democrats are bad. We're going to get rid of them. These other people are bad. We're going to get rid of them too. which means that the majority of people who voted for Trump, which is his base, right? The swing voters, the independents, were not the largest group of people to vote for him. If anything, I think it's much smaller than the 20% that I'm allowing. At minimum, right? That 30% base, which would have to be a majority, right? Even if it was, 22% on the swing vote side. The majority of people who voted for Donald Trump voted based on hatred and anger. And that's just what you're not going to hear out there from the pundits who are trying to avoid saying things that offend people, avoid saying things that seem partisan, and let's be honest, avoid saying things that put them in danger now that journalists are back under the gun because Trump is coming for them too. Okay, so with that, I'll see you soon. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please like, please subscribe. If you didn't, still feel free to comment. I love to respond. I might even make a video trying to respond. And please do share with your friends. Thanks so much. I hope you have a great day.